Well, hello, my fellow niggers on the plantation. Is the master treating you right? Has he got you 3 meals and a cot? He ain't whipping you too much? 'Cause you know if he whips you too much, then you ain't gonna be bringing in the crop and the harvest. 'Cause it ain't good for the man not to get his money, right? 'Cause if you think you are free, boy, we're gonna have a little talk today. Because what happened yesterday, I think that's just another nail in the coffin of freedom for all we Americans who've been slaves since 1781. What does that mean? Well, let's go back. Further back than I thought they stole our education from us. But if you saw what was happening with Melania, and she was trotting out her new mechanical nigga, because that's what they're going to be calling that one, and that's supposed to be taking the place of normal people. But this is the worst part about that. If you've done the research on how we as human beings have been losing our cognitive abilities generation after generation after generation since the creation of the improvement of technology. See, because before that, actually, before Gen Z, every generation that followed had an improvement of cognitive ability of the prior generation. It's been tracked for decades. But what's happened now is that since they have relied more and more on technology in order to teach kids, the cognitive ability has been going down. Remember what I've told you in the past, that one of the cautions I have of being on YouTube as compared to just on my podcast, or even better, writing books and writing articles the way I used to when I had time, is that it forced you to put more of yourself into the interaction. When you watch me on YouTube, when you watch Sean Ryan and all the guests, and Joe Rogan and all the guests, and you watch it and you see the pictures, your brain is not being used to develop things and be creative. It's just there to be a sponge. What else do you want to be a sponge? Oh, you want a subject who will do whatever you want to be a sponge. Not respond, not interact, not retort. Yeah, kind of like a slave. Slave will do your bidding, will make you money, doesn't cost too much because you just give them enough. Does that sound like socialism? That's where socialism comes from. That's why when people say, oh, well, we're against the capitalism, so we got to become socialists. Because that's not like communism. No, it's not like communism. Not understanding the true socialism, true capitalism, which we haven't had in this country since the Rothschilds took over this country. And they started playing in Wall Street, and they took over Wall Street. See, Wall Street was actually a marketplace. It was a good place. It was a place of trade. It was a market, and it was Wall Street. But then what happened is the Rothschilds came in under August Belmont, and when he took it over, that's when it became a tool of slavery. Slavery is when all your work and energy of the people is pyramided towards a very elite group of people. And instead of getting the full return for all the work that you've been doing, you get a little bit of return in relation to the profit that's being made off of your work. And when you do that, the country suffers. And what's happening right now is they're getting ready to do something even more insidious, which they have been doing already. And I'm going to take you back. That's why I consider us having been on the Rockefeller Plantation. And that Rockefeller Plantation was started in 1910. What happened in 1910? 1910 was the creation of the General Education Board. That John D. Rockefeller, Sr., the very same person who was quoted as saying that after he started this, that he didn't want thinkers, he wanted workers. So when you dumb down people who don't question things, will not look at events in the past, won't look at events in the present and just look at what is coming and what they want, then you have a slave. You will have a slave that is easily conditioned to do exactly what they want as long as they keep that carrot in front of you. That's why when I learned that they had modified the education system so drastically in 1910 with the idea of getting people to go into the cities and away from the very thing that made them free and actually have a life of abundance based on their land that they owned as farmers, as ranchers. And they've been consistently doing that, which is getting people away from their true wealth and towards the illusion of wealth, which is the fiat currency. Remember, fiat currency is just a bunch of numbers. It started off as paper replacing real money, which was gold and silver and copper, depending on what country. And then once it got into paper money, it started becoming an illusion. And then when they separated the gold from the money under Nixon, that totally opened up the ability to just basically say, trust me, I have this amount of money. When in reality, you don't have this amount of money. That's why it's so hard to go get actual cash. And some banks say that, no, you can't do that. And they can't do that because there is no money. That's the wild part about all this. But people have been so conditioned through education, or I should say the lack thereof. Remember, if you were old enough to remember, that they used to teach us how to actually balance a checkbook? They don't teach that anymore. Do they teach home economics so you can actually cook for yourself? Because guess who's going to die first? The people who can't cook for themselves. The people who don't know that maybe if this food's been laying out for a long time, you shouldn't eat it because you're going to die. Yeah, that's by design. And our whole society has been kidnapped by not only these enslavers like the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and the Fords, when before Ford was actually trying to make a difference, but again, it's for self-interest. And that's actually one of the things that was being taught before is who benefits? Who benefits from any action? People aren't asked that. In journalism, military analysis, who benefits? Follow the money. But really, it's who benefits. Who benefits from a population that is generation after generation dumbified, made into people who can't think for themselves, people who don't question things, that automatically respond to the idea of like, oh, like a little baby, give me the lollipop, give me the lollipop. Well, you know what? The evil cabal has been giving you the lollipop. They give you Social Security. They give you free money during COVID. But they ask something in return, which is pay this amount of money out of your income, which is rightfully yours. Then you don't realize that suddenly the money that was supposed to be coming back to you, equal amount for what you had paid in, doesn't come back to you equal amount because it had already been spent on something else. California is like a perfect example of this. Where did all the money go for that was supposed to go for the rail system that was going to go between LA and San Francisco? Shoot, I was hearing that in the 70s when I was a kid, that they were going to have a rail between LA and San Francisco. Then they got the money and nothing's been done. In the meantime, China, Japan, they've actually built these things and they work fantastic. But the United States, no. Why? Because that's an indicator, corruption, major corruption, of a fall of a society. And I'm going to show you later how this is going to be a fall of civilization. And that's going to be the scary part because it'll go across the world. That's why I'm starting to go back and watch old episodes and read more on the stuff that Graham Hancock has released. Because Graham Hancock, he tells you about these prior civilizations. How do you think they disappeared? And nobody even knows who and what they were or where they were, but they left these very interesting buildings and Punku. God, I'm trying to remember that place in Bolivia. You know, the crazy Greek Austrian with the hair. Yeah, that guy. Yeah, well, all the slaves on the plantation. So they dummified everybody. And people think, oh, they just did it to the black community. No, they didn't. They did it to everybody. They've done it to everybody. But I noticed it when I was a kid because some of the people that I respected so incredibly, as you've seen before, where I talked about my dad's friend, you know, African American, a black American from New York, very well educated, full on drive, raised his kids fantastically. That used to be the norm. But what happened? Oh, they started screwing with the culture. They started coming out with different kinds of song medium. You know, when it went from like Motown and went to rap, you think that was an accident? You think that was just feeding the population and the kids just wanted it? Or was it the idea that they've been working on the population and said, no, you can be all independent. You can be all on your own. But in actuality, they're actually trying to put you back into the collective. Because if they separate you from your families, if they separate you from your parents, and they separate you from your family line where you don't even know your family history, because you don't talk with your family. That's why on the image that you saw as the landing image, that's actually my great grandfather with the horse and buggy and the cart. That was in Fort Shaw, Montana, somewhere between 1910 and 1915. And I bring that up, and the reason I'm using that imagery with Melania and the robot, the reason is because I thought my father had the best education of the last of the best educations, and maybe my grandfather. But you know what? Now that we know that they actually, when Rockefeller donated $1 million in 1910 for the creation of under the Rockefeller Foundation. Remember, these foundations, as we learned under the Reese Commission, they are not to help people. They are in order to modify behavior and get the slaves in line. That's what it's all about. Oh, and by the way, for those people that maybe think that I'm using the word nigga as a racist derogatory term, yeah, actually, it's a terminology that's been used throughout history for various reasons. But in this situation, we are all the niggas because we are all under this master of slavery. this cabal, this master cabal that has enslaved the whole world using various tools such as the education system, through using the financial system. And when it starts to get really hairy, they'll be using the military system. And that's the point where you're going to have to decide. Are you going to continue to be a slave, a loyalist, a Tory, or are you going to be a colonial, a rebel? Because it's already happened. It's already been taken over. It's been taken over for at least 150 years. Completely. To the point that the American people are not represented. And even other countries that had a semblance of representation for the citizens. Even Switzerland, who would think is like the last option because they're actually the ones who have the wealth. They're the ones who have control. Think about it. The ones with the most wealth are the ones who've been in the least amount of wars. You ever thought about that? Why is that? Why is it the Americans end up being the lapdogs for the cabal when it comes to going out and blowing people up and shooting up people and taking their countries, and under the idea of, oh, we're going to get them back for what they did to us? And then these are the Americans saying, well, oh yeah, we were attacked at 9/11. Really? I've shown you. I've told you, which I totally trust from Admiral Lyons when he flat out told me that Pearl Harbor was a flat out false flag. Because in the same way that the bombing of the Marines in Beirut was a similar type, which is the prevention of information getting across. Mossad and the chief of station specifically told everybody within Mossad not only that the truck with the bombs and the explosives, they knew everything about it, but even what it looked like exactly. Everybody in Mossad knew, but CIA and Marines were not told. Think about that. And so what happened after that? Then suddenly we get American involvement in the Middle East on a level that we had never had before. Because remember, when you create blood debt, that's where you go and spend blood, then you're committed. It's in the same way like World War II. We get into Europe again. Why do we get into Europe? I thought that was the war to end all wars was World War I. Well, because it wasn't worked properly. And, well, you know, the Germans, they got up again, so now we got to go out there and fix it. Why? Especially when you find out what Churchill was up to and who was running his strings, in the same way that the same people are running Trump's strings and run every president's strings since John F. Kennedy. And look what happened to John F. Kennedy when he actually wanted to make America great. Really. Or like when Reagan would try to protect the United States, and bingo, he gets a 22 Winchester mag in the chest and nearly dies from it. The game is loaded. The deck is loaded. The question is, how do you get out of this? It comes down to education. The more people know a true education, the better it is. We have a problem right now that is occurring in the United States, especially, and it's going to go around the world. And you saw that yesterday with Melania trotting out that robot who they said was going to be now the instructors for the children. I'm going to put links. Remember, I always do the research for you, and I put links down in the first pinned comment. That first pinned comment are all the links that I've put together so you can go further into it so that I'm not laying over content on these episodes. I just want to talk to you straight. Later, I'm going to probably have to just actually put stuff in, like images for you to look at and see, because I don't want to have them sitting on my database. So look at the links that I'm putting down in the first pinned comment. Well, it's the only pinned comment. All my links related to each episode are always in the pinned comment. Go follow those. One of them is you'll get to see the whole talk where Melania is talking about the new robot. But also you'll see the one with the teacher who went back and got his PhD, and he did a bunch of research, and he realized that for the first time, Gen Z cognitively rated much lower than the previous generation. That has never happened in history. It's always been better, bigger, and better because we've gotten better teaching skills. But the key that is missing with Gen Z is they were directed to be more reliant on technical media in order to study and learn. There wasn't the human-to-human interaction. That's planned. Why? Because they are dumbing us down. This dumbing down, going back to I want workers, I want worker drones, worker bee drones. I don't want thinkers. Let me take you to a book. This is a book that came out in 1879. This was one of the required texts, and I'm reading it right now. I'll put a link so you can get your own copy. You read that book, and you realize that this book, like I told you, when I looked at my dad's high school books, they were kind of like on a PhD level about U.S. history and U.S. government. But in order for him to graduate high school, he had to know everything in there. And also, of course, he went valedictorian. So he was a thinker. And he was the one that taught me to be really critical of all this stuff, because he had lived long enough to see the attacks on our education system. But he didn't see this one, because this one goes all the way back to my great-grandfather's time, William Graham. William Graham got his education in the late 1800s in Orient, Iowa. So as I told you the story, family had come over across from Ulster in 1774 on the Pennsylvania Farmer. So if you go look at it, you'll see a David. There's a roster. You can dig it up. It pops right up on a Google search. There's a David Graham and his son Andrew and his other children on the Pennsylvania Farmer coming to Charleston, South Carolina in 1774. And then they go up into the mountains. It's a stereotype of the creation of the 13 colonies and moving west. And on the other side, I told you, on the Fuller side, I want to follow that one to see how that went. And the descendants of Samuel Fuller and his father, Edward. But in 1910, when Rockefeller changed it, he changed the understanding, because this book, Progress and Poverty by Henry George, and the title says, An Inquiry into the Cause of Industrial Depressions and of Increase of Want with Increase of Wealth, The Remedy by Henry George. In there, he talks about the big question. Why is it the more technologically advanced our society becomes, the worse it gets for the common man and common woman? And more, the wealth and prosperity gets directed towards the elites. Why is that? That in itself requires you to read the book. I'd suggest going and reading it. But look at how it plays out now, because we went through the industrial age. And now we're going into we've been in the technical age. And more we're going into the service age, because that's how we start to stumble and fall. Because we don't produce anything. But in order to produce something, you got to have people who want something. And if people have everything and they're happy, they don't want anything. And that's why you create chaos. And that's why you create want. Because you stole everything from people. That's how that works. That's what they're doing. That's what we've been doing in other countries. We have stolen from other countries. We have stolen from other people. And people say, oh, well, they wouldn't have developed it. That's true. And the worst part about like what's happening in Iran, especially when we killed the one who was kind of like holding back the missiles and the nuclear programs, now for sure we're going to get a really big one. And that fits the program. Because when it comes down to it, oh man, got a freaking eagle coming in. As long as it flies on. And it did. Okay. So, yeah, I'm going to have to go deal with this because I can see that eagle right there. We'll be back. Well, we took care of that. Everything's cool and groovy. All the birds are nice and fine. Sometimes when you get unwanted guests. Life on the farm. So, they're stealing from you. And the most important thing that they could ever steal from you, money is not it. Even land isn't it. Because land you can defend. But your education system is the one that is the most important to you, and it's also the one that is so easy to steal from you. And they do that. Remember we told you about the devil, about vampires, about Dracula? How do they come into the house? They have to be invited. And how do you get invited? You shapeshift. And then you're invited. Because you seem as a friend. You're welcome. Come on in. Please sit at our table. And then while this demon is sitting at the table, they start doing the snake talk. And the snake talk is basically saying, oh, this is a better education system. The children are just going to enjoy it so much more. They're going to be more involved in everything. They're really going to get into it. It's going to be cool. It's going to be unique. It's going to be attractive. And the best part is the price of the education won't go up because we're going to pay little robots to do it. But the problem is the interactivity. You remove the interactivity, which is why when I finish teaching or doing the learning languages in a rapid time, one of the most important things is not repeating and talking things over. It's having questions made upon you. That's why it's the interactivity. You need someone to talk to you and say, hey, how was your day? Instead of you just repeating what you're hearing from a tape or in a class. That's the reason of having a teacher who will ask you questions. But there are ways to do that where you can actually do recording and have it be variable. You can have somebody else do it. and have it recorded. Have them record and then have them pop up a question. And for the first time, you're now hit with a question. And how do you respond to it? This is the thing about not cheating yourself from stress and duress. This is what's happened into our culture. We've had it so good that that's how you create weak men and weak women. Because you don't have the strengths that are brought about by coming to the cause, coming to the call, the challenge. If you don't come to the challenge, you won't have the opportunity to bring all these great qualities that everybody has within ourselves. We all have it. I have it. You have it. The reason I know my skills and my experiences is because I put myself under I'm kind of weird on that level, which is kind of like, most people, when they're afraid of something, they run away from it. As a kid, I trained myself to go into the fire. I trained myself to go into my greatest fears. I would take stock. What am I most afraid of? Okay, let's go do that. And as a result of that, I'm able to see what's happening in the world while everybody is just looking around going, like Tucker, I don't know what's happening. Or Chris Martinson with COVID. Why are they doing this? All these questions, why are they doing this? Well, are they really doing this? These are the questions you get from weak people, from people who have not been challenged by true trauma. Your grandparents were challenged by true trauma, and they came through it, and you are the result of that. But one of the things is, parents don't want their kids to go through the traumas that they went through. And the sad part of that, and kind of like the twisted part of that, is that if you protect them from that, then you are stealing from them the opportunity for them to be better than you. Because they were challenged. And they already have the genetics of you in them that has already gone through your challenges. Do you understand that? Can you really appreciate that? The idea that parents used to say, oh, don't get in the way of the kid learning. Now it's like, oh, no, we need to teach you this. But see, when you do that, you set it up where, remember I was telling you how the whole movement in the 70s was totally owned by the Rockefellers, and they did that because they were modifying the society and they wanted to steal more. Remember, they don't do it for your benefit. They do it in order to steal from you and to take from you. Because the more that they take from you, the less that you have to stand on. The less that you have to stand on, the easier it is to enslave you further and further into their plantation. That's what this is all about. It is Great Planet Earth plantation. Slave plantation. And they do it, and they're doing it right now, and people should be freaking livid. You need to stop this. We need to stop this. If they continue to do this and dumbify population after generation after generation, it's totally lost. They're doing things to us because they know they couldn't do it to our parents. They did things to our parents that they knew they couldn't do to our grandparents. Because our grandparents had closer ties. And the same way I was telling you, like my great-grandfather, William Graham. He would have laughed at this. And now he's probably crying to think that's actually been allowed, all the things that have happened to us in the last 50 to 60 years. That we've allowed to happen because we thought it was better. Oh yeah, we live in the cities and everything's going to be 15 minutes. And you won't have to go anywhere. Yeah, and if you want to go to the gym, you can go to the gym. But if you don't want to go to the gym, you don't have to go to the gym. Because right now, in school, you don't even have to have PT. Because they want you weak. Because right now, the Malthusians are taking over. And they have been taking over for ever since they started doing the Green Movement. That Green Movement, remember, where's the money? Where's the money going? So if the Rothschilds are throwing their money in, and the Rockefellers are throwing their money in, and it's the Green Movement, it's not about saving the planet. Well, yeah, it is kind of about saving the planet. But first, in order to save the planet, you got to thin the human population. So you do things that make it harder for people to be independent, feed themselves, and feed themselves food that keeps them out of the hospital. Because if you keep the people out of the hospital, you can't make any money. That's what that's all been about. Remember, they get you on the food. The same corporation that produces the food for you is the same corporation that sells you the medicine and charges you all the fees and owns the insurance companies. So they've got you in this trap. So while this is the real matrix here. The matrix is to keep you just totally distracted. Right? It's like my alarm system right now. It's like going off because the chickens are on the deck. Little buggers. It's kind of cool though, you know, when you got like big turkeys that walk around on the deck and it sounds like 10-year-old kids running. Tom, 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 tom. First time I heard the turkeys hit the deck, it was like, is there somebody out there? And it was just the turkeys jumping down from a rail and running around. And then they start, because now it's spring, right? So all the gobblers are going nuts and they're fighting with each other, and the gobblers and the hens are all mating. So they mate on the deck because it's nice and comfy, because they don't want to do it on the ice. Oh man. See, I hope you're living in the country. You can get distracted by this stuff instead of watching Melania walk out a robot that's going to actually dumbify the next generation. And remember, as we get older, the whole idea of the younger generation in a healthy civilization is that the younger generation takes care of the older generation. So how are you going to feel about a younger generation that maybe has to give you medications or has to be prompt and has to like be responsible, and they turn out to be very irresponsible and not attentive whatsoever to what they're doing? Because as long as they get their money, they're good. Do you know where that happened before? Oh yeah, the Soviet Union. Because everybody was guaranteed of being taken care of in the Soviet Union. And the only time that things changed and it fell was when they ran out of money. And if the objective is not to set Israel as the dominator of the Middle East, which it isn't, even though that's what the news is telling you. Because think about this. If the news is telling you that, remember who owns the news and a lot of the social media, especially the big ones. Remember I told you, there's a number. If it's above, you don't have to worry about me because I have such a small following. So anybody who gets my information, I've been thinking critically, and I am not being chosen. If Israel's supposed to dominate, like John says, like there's going to be a Pax Judaica, there ain't going to be no Pax Judaica except after total annihilation of the 80% we were talking about. Remember, the Goyim and the bad Jews, the ones who are not following the Torah, or more specifically the Talmud, aka the workbook of Baal. Maybe we'll talk about Israel and real history, because I consider myself a historian. As a matter of fact, my books, if you read my books, they're not get emotional with me, though I do write it from that point of view. But my books are, this is what happened. I saw it happen. I'm a historical record of events in the world because I was there at the time, like the Tet Offensive of Saigon, the exit of US troops in 72, the building up of Singapore under Lee Kuan Yew as he turned it into the plethora of wealth, kind of like the Switzerland of Southeast Asia, the Lion City, Singapore. But I'm also a historian in terms of looking at what's happening now in relation to what happened in the past. And what's happening right now is we see all these events where you get people who are getting their bread in circuses, they're getting their soccer, they're getting their baseball, they're getting their NFL, they're getting their hockey. And that's what they talk about because they can't talk about politics. And oh my God, don't talk about money. Because if you talk about money, you might actually be exchanging information. It's kind of like, what's that old thing about like, oh, don't tell anybody when you get hired at the company how much you're making. What was the rule that I always asked? I wanted to know what everybody was making. And I found out. Because people like to brag or they like to bitch. And if you know which one to come in on, you'll get some solid content and information and intel with which to work. So then, when you go to another company, you know exactly how much you're going to ask, plus 25%. So if you're wondering how I was telling you, the guys who knew what they were doing, yeah, if you weren't making 250,000, 300,000 a year, and by your second or third year in Silicon Valley, 500,000 a year, you were screwing up. And it was mainly because you were following the rules. See, because when you follow the rules are dictated by the master. And the master don't want the niggas to get uppity, right? Because we niggas, if we get uppity, what's going to happen? Oh, we're going to actually go and take the house down. I'm waiting to see when that's going to happen. Big question is, how long is it going to take? Is it going to happen when your kids are starving? Is it going to happen when they break into your house, into your neighborhood, and they take everybody from the neighborhood and put you on a train or a bus and take you to a camp, and then you are never coming out again? Is that what it's going to take? To the point that then you will have to run into the mountains and be like, Wolverine! You're going to have to do that? I hope to God we don't have to wait until that point to take back our country. Because if you're at that point, that's going to be the long haul. And a lot of people just don't have the wherewithal, and especially now, the wherewithal to deal with the long haul. Remember, I did El Salvador. That was 5 years of a 11, 12-year war. Look what it did to Salvadorans. And people who think they remember what the war was like. It's interesting because I'm seeing this new generation who are Salvadorans and Salvadoran Americans, and they talk about, oh, well, my mom brought me to this country, or my dad came to this country because he was running because he didn't want to get drafted by either side. So they were seeing what was happening up from here and getting the information, because it's always going to be muy dramática from down in El Salvador as compared to what was happening and what we were trying to do and what the other side was trying to do. And then the wherewithal that it didn't really matter, the military actions, because in the end, even though we won militarily and we crushed the communists militarily, they still won. How did they do that? As I said, if you can't get it with blood, you can get it with cash. And so they bought out all the elections. And we should know that because they did the same thing here. That's what they've been doing since they killed Lincoln. Really? Yeah. When Lincoln found out that they were going to actually put us on a central bank in the manner that they have now under the Federal Reserve, they were trying to do it under Lincoln, the Rothschilds, and the Cabal, and the Illuminati. And by the way, that book is a scorcher, the one that I found that was written in 1798 by Professor Robinson, a real professor, mind you, not like Professor, what's his name? Shikwan Jiang. Yeah, no, a real professor at the University of Edinburgh who was invited into the Freemasons. And he actually went up in grade very quickly. They brought him in at the top. And he was so freaked out by what he had seen, he wrote the book and had it published in 1798 in Philadelphia, because you couldn't get it published in the UK, right? For the same reason if you're trying to publish something like David Icke was trying to get things across, and no, we're not publishing that here. Who controls the media controls the mind. Unless you have the ability to ask questions. And the first question you need to ask is, who benefits? Every time that you see something, who benefits? And let's take a look. Let's use that example right now. We'll use that example right now. Who benefits from AI, robots, taking over education systems? Especially when we know, as I've told you, and you're going to be able to listen to this teacher who went into the, got his PhD and then did the research on the cognitive ability of children and realizing that actually technology was ruining it and destroying it. So, yeah, let me turn that off because I've got just a second. As you may remember, my century system here is based on a specific tune for every part of property. So, based on whatever the tune is, for instance, that one is the, is that Raiders of the Lost Ark? It's one of the Indiana Jones tunes, right? Well, that's one over there. Then there's another one, a tune, and blah, 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 everywhere else, right? And if you have land, I hope you've got the same kind of century systems. If not, I will put a link down, and you can order as many as you want. Put them all over. and set up cams too. Shoot, we did it in Central America. We learned to do it in Vietnam. And why shouldn't you? You can now buy stuff that was top secret only 30 years ago. So you ask a question, who's going to benefit? Who's going to benefit with the AI? The AI. The AI is going to benefit the destruction of the civilization. And why are they destroying the civilization? Because it's gotten too big. We're going to talk about the stupid rich guys, right? Because there are the smart rich guys, which nobody ever knows. Those are part of the higher Illuminati cabal, and they don't really care about money. But then there are those who think they're hot shit because they've got maybe a few billion, maybe a few million, and they think they're wealthy. But here's the problem, and this has been noted, and it's very clear to me because I could see this happening. When you have too many rich people, what's that old saying? When you have too many chiefs and not enough Indians, there's an imbalance. And the way you destroy that is you blow the economy. So think about all these multimillionaires in the 1920s who suddenly were jumping off the 13th floor in New York because they invested and they were doing all their trading in Wall Street or wherever they, because it didn't matter. The whole economy drops. When the whole economy drops, everything is gone. And all that's happening is the true wealthy elite, the ones you and I don't know, the ones above the George Soroses, the ones above the Warren Buffetts. You think there's more richer people? Yeah, there's a very tight group of the very wealthy who have brought some of the millionaire and billionaire class up to give them a little taste of the little club. And then in there, they're going to find out, like, am I going to survive, or am I going to be some of those millionaires and billionaires who freaking just tank out and shoot themselves in the head because they put all their life into making this wealth and being focused on greed and money, and it didn't do a damn thing for them in the end. Because if you ask the right questions, and that's the sad thing, is that the very education that would have given you the right questions to ask, like books like these that were published before 1910 on economics and finance, far beyond just a class in how to balance your checkbook, but to understand what true wealth is and why there has been an increase in poverty through the stealing by the elites who have gone above quicker and think of others as insignificant. That the Jews come up with the idea, the label for the non-Jews is goyim, which is, cattle and slaves. Basically, theirs to do with whatever they want. But it's all the wealthy elite, whether they're Jews or not, who think that all of us are goyim, that we are cattle and slaves for them. And when we have too many cows in the field and the price on beef keeps on dropping because you got too much. What happened in Montana back in the 70s? Kind of freaked me out. I think it was a Life magazine, or maybe it was a National Geographic. And I looked at it and I saw a bunch of Montana cattlemen. And in a big, giant grave, a giant pit, was a bunch of cattle all shot in the head and tossed in there with a tractor. Why? Because the price of beef had gone too low. And so in order to jack up the price, they cut down on the supply. And the sad part of it, they turned into fertilizer. Total waste. Disgusting. They wouldn't even give it to the local churches, I guess. I found it disgusting. To just shoot an animal and just bury it, especially something that was raised for food. But think about people who are so up and away from the rest that they think that all of us, because we don't have their wealth and don't have their status, which is so high that nobody even knows who they really are because they're smart enough to keep their heads out of the public eye. So we're talking above the monarchs, above the royals, that They have dominion over us. But you know what? If you have your own land and nobody screws with you, you're totally, and you feed yourself, and you can go fly fishing. I go fly fishing. This summer I'll be going fly fishing. I'm going to take my drift boat up and down the Kenai River. I'm going to have fun. I'm going to take my bear runner across the bay and shoot a couple bear. Put them in the freezer. And then I'll have an extra hide to work on. And I'll bear claws, more bear claws. I got lots of bear claws. That's called independence. Your ancestors had this. You may notice that every time I talk to you, I'm trying to get you connected to your ancestors. If you don't know who your ancestors are, start studying. I didn't really understand who my ancestors were until my dad gave me a family tree. And then from that family tree, I started reading about these people. Who are the people who went west with Daniel Boone? Yeah, my family did. Who went west and north into Illinois, and then went south into Iowa, looking for farmland, their own farmland that was flat and rich, out there in the central United States. It was your ancestors, and who were leaving Europe, coming here, coming from Asia, wherever they came from. They came here because of the ideals that they had, and they were going to make something of it. Not like the ones that come now, who were given a free ride. What is the intention and what is the attraction? Remember, they came and they knew they would probably never go back. Now you can just jump on a plane and fly back to India. And you can take the money that you made here and you can go become a king over there. And you can work remotely after you just do 3 or 4 or 5 years here. And live better than you could have ever lived. We'll talk more about the people who are living in the United States to go into these other countries. How is that going to play out with what's coming? They think they're safe. If you're not in the club, you're not safe. And I can almost guarantee, if you don't have at least, 200 billion, you're not in the club. And that's US dollars now. So there was one question. I want to get into quick questions. Question: how did I get through Vietnam in prison? It's very easy. I knew I was going to get out. And this is what I'm going to leave you with. I'm going to leave you on a happy note right now. You need to take control of your mind. Later, I'll start sharing some tools on how to do that, but there are a lot of tools, and that is focused engineering. You focus on the idea that you're going to get through this. If you don't have that wherewithal, there's something in your psychology, there's something in your physiology. I can understand that because I had been going through the diverticulitis. Do you want to see somebody so incredibly demoralized? Take out the lower chakra on a human being. That's actually one of the reasons, if you want to get somebody real quick to get them on the ground, is to do a sucker punch into the lower gut. If you get into the lower gut, which is actually specifically where the lower chakra, the emotional chakra is, and below that, between the sexual chakra and the emotional chakra, that is a very tender area. That's actually when you go through special forces training, special operations training, you learn to tighten that up through various techniques. So when you get into a actual hand-to-hand with somebody and they punch you there, it won't take you off center as it will if you're not prepared for it. So it's training. So when I was taken prisoner in 1983, I was taken prisoner June 16th, 1983 at 8 o'clock at night on the island of Hon Che Lon, right between the border of Cambodia and Vietnam. At that point, when I was in the village with Richard Knight, and it was at nighttime too, and I'd already been beat up when they took me. Really, we can. If you read the book, you could see what that was like. But basically, turned my eyesight in my left eye from 2020. Remember, I was going to be a pilot for the Marine Corps. From 2020 to 2080 in the left eye. And that in itself is to show you, no matter what situation you may be in, you can always fix it. That's why ophthalmologists and I don't get along too well, except the ones who actually want to help you with your eyesight. The reason is because if you study the work by Dr. William Bates, he realized that the human body heals. And the human body, even the eyes, See, because ophthalmologists will tell you, no, your eyes don't, they just get worse. And that's why they keep on giving you glasses. In actuality, what they're doing is they're putting braces, just like on your teeth, they're putting on your eyes. So what happens when you're putting braces on your teeth? You're moving the teeth in a direction, and they keep on going that direction. Well, if you put glasses on your eyes and you don't do exercises in order to fix things and retrain your eyes back, your eyesight will get worse. Well, you know what? My medical, on my pilot license, my medical, I have no restrictions. I have no corrective lenses. But you know what? In 1984, when I came back and I got my eyes tested, I had to get glasses. I wore glasses until I went to Central America. And I was on a chopper. And I was flying back after covering a battle. And I was wearing glasses. And I thought to myself, if I can keep on wearing these glasses, I'm going to get killed. So what did I do? I tossed the glasses out the window, or the door of the chopper. And what happened at that moment is I didn't know about William Bates and the eyesight and how you could fix it. What that was is, by every time that I come back on when I was a journalist and then later when I was running operations, I would just keep on looking at the horizon. I didn't know that by looking at the horizon and looking in at the inside of the chopper and looking at the people inside and looking out and just doing this constant movement with the neck, releasing the neck muscles that create stress, that work on the eyes, I was actually improving my eyesight to the point that when I came back from the war, so I got to El Salvador after Vietnam, I got there in 85, and my last time was at the end of 89, right after the battle in San Salvador. My eyesight had improved. Not only to 2020, it went to 2015. I had my eyes tested. So it had gone from 28, so it had 2020 when I was a officer candidate for the Marine Corps at Berkeley, with an aviation option. And you have to have 2020 back then. I think pretty sure it's still due, 2020, and uncorrected. To 2080 after I got back from prison in Vietnam in 1984, to then coming back from Central America the last time with 2015. So nothing is rigid. Everything is possible. That should show you anything is possible. The physical world will bend to your intention if it's focused and it is aware and looking at everything and working with everything that is there and expanding upon that. So the question I was asked is, how did I get through prison? Because right now we are on the prison planet, right? We're in the slave plantation planet. How you get through this and get to freedom. You get through freedom by visualizing what it is. But you have to recognize you're in a prison. You have to recognize you're the nigga on the plantation. We are the niggas on the plantation. And that should piss you off on various levels. I hope it does. Because you don't want to be that. It doesn't matter your color. I've told you that. It's about your mind and the intention of these people. Because they're colorblind too. There are blacks in the cabal. There's Asians in the cabal. There's whites in the cabal. They don't care about color either. But they're just freaking evil. And they look at us and they don't care. We're all just their boys and girls to play with them, as Epstein has shown, if you've read the files, which that enough should get you pissed off. As I've said before, if you don't know how to shoot, I would suggest, because something's going to give. We have the perfect recipe right now for something giving. And it ain't going to be pretty. And the question is, are you going to be able to keep your wherewithal to get through it and have the focus and the optimism? That's another component of how I got through prison. I knew I was going to get out. I didn't know how. I tried to escape. A couple times I tried to escape. The bars. If you ever saw, was it Escape from Alcatraz? The one with Clint Eastwood? I attributed it. Because I had, M.T. Kane was one of my agents when I was trying to sell the book through an agent. Boy, I can tell you freaking some horror stories about that. But M.T. Kane was the agent who got Clint Eastwood, M.T. Cohen, Kane. she was the wife of the famous writer, I forget him, for San Francisco Chronicle back in the 40s and 50s. Herb Cain. Herb Cain's wife, M.T. Cain, Maria Teresa. So she was my agent, but she was also the agent who got the sale of Escape to Alcatraz to Clint Eastwood. Well, I told her about that I watched that movie, and that's actually one of the ways I was trying to escape, because the bars, if you know about how crappy concrete is in Asia, and especially in communist countries, if you've been seeing in China with all these buildings just catching on fire and falling over, I was scraping at the bars trying to get out. But then they moved me to another prison, and that's what they're doing. So they keep on moving us to another prison. That's how they keep you. They change your state. The key, though, to get through things is to always retain your state inside, so it doesn't matter if you're on a treadmill or you're in an earthquake. You're stable. This is how you get through it. This is how you're going to get through what's coming. This is how you're going to get through what's happening. When you realize that Melania bringing down a robot is continuing of this Malthusian destruction of society by dumbing down kids. Because if we know publicly, through this professor who did the research and was talking to Ted Cruz in a Senate committee hearing about education, then they knew about this a long time ago. And so it's part of their plan to dumb us down. Not us older folks, because whatever state you're at that you have your learning, we're pretty anchored to it, right? I wish I had the anchoring to what my great-grandfather had, because his education would tell me what is so screwed up that we take for accepted fact now. That's why I'm reading these old books, to know what it was like when people were truly wealthy, and yet they had very little fiat currency, right? We have more poverty, and we have more paper money, and we have more digital cash. What does that tell you? It tells you that the more that the technology is being used on the currency, the more they're enslaving people. It's not in order to bring prosperity. They're always going to have a prosperous experience because they're always living off our work. That's how that works. But when you had something like we had in the United States before 1910, and Rockefeller basically trashed it from 1910 until 1914. And what was happening in 1914? Everybody had been conditioned already, and they were already fighting in Europe. And then they did it again in 1930s. Just before World War II. Does that make you think about things? Does it make you ask questions? Okay, on that note, I hope me telling you the way I got through prison was I had a positive attitude. I knew I was going to get through this, and I've been telling you I'm getting through this, and I hope you're going to get through it with me. On that level, share this with your friends. Maybe they might get something out of it. They'll at least get something out of the links below. I did some research. I did some research for you. I did some research for me. I'm just sharing it with you. On that note, God bless. Watch your six.